And when did you start actually making money off of the site? How long did it take?
It took till around 2010.
2010.
Yeah, it took about 5 years, but it started making money fairly early. We started taking ads. Then we discovered you can, if you recommended books that were on Amazon, Amazon would pay you a finder's fee.
Mhm.
Um, and then as Amazon expanded beyond books, tongs, spatulas. So we started testing products like that, lights, and so the affiliate revenue, and thermometers. I mean, I early on I became a great fan and advocate of thermometers. My wife worked for the FDA for a number of years in the food safety world, and she once told me she thinks that we have probably been responsible for more thermometer sales than the USDA. We just preach thermometers on every page, and I mean, when you go back to 2010 or so, the competition chefs weren't using thermometers. They were all, poking the meat, and you can tell when brisket is done. You stick a fork in it and twist it, and it's got to have the wubba wubba. And I think we get a little bit of credit for teaching the world that they're not the end all be all for things like brisket, but for things like steak and chicken, absolutely, there's nothing better than a thermometer to get you where you want to be.
One of the things that impressed me significantly is the amount of earned media that you've been able to leverage from your book, but also on the myth busting side of,
Yeah.
of really taking something that, is maybe, let's say, in popular culture, this is what people think is right, but then actually showing the science behind it to prove it wrong. And it's gotten you a lot of significant media coverage. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, as a journalist, also as a person with an interest in science, um, you are trained to ask, how do you know that to be true? I mean, that's the most important question. When
Yeah.
somebody says something, how do you know that to be true? You know, well, you got to soak the wood chips. Makes more smoke. How do you know that to be true? So you test it and you think about it and you say, now, wait a second. Water boils at 212 degrees. What temperature does wood burn at? 500 or 600. So if you've got wood chips that are wet, they can't burn until the water boils off. So what is that stuff that when you throw the wood chips on? So you get a mirror and you hold a mirror over it and it fogs up. And you realize, holy cow, that's steam. Then you call up the physicist. And I met this guy, Greg, was into barbecue. He came to the website. He was interested. And I started bringing physics and chemistry questions to him. And we run tests.
What was his name?
Greg Blonder, Blonder. His name is on the cover of our book. He's the he is the science advisor to AmazingRibs.com. And I put him on the cover of the book because he's the one who really helped guide me down the science path and answer my, like right now, one of the questions I'm struggling with are the vacuum tumblers. People want to put meat inside of a vacuum tumbling machine with a marinade, and the idea is it's going to suck the marinade in. Now, wait a minute. If you put something into a vacuum, you're sucking the air out. So you're going to suck the moisture out. How's the marinade going to go in? I mean, just, logically. So you start questioning this, and I called up the chef at Buddig, which is a large meat processor. He used to be my sous chef, and he's now down there full time. They do tumbling, vacuum tumblers, and I've got another guy, Dr. Antonio Mata, used to be at Oklahoma State, a meat scientist. I call him up and ask him, and then I call Blonder up, so I get the physics, the meat science, and everything. And it turns out it works if you've injected the meat but it's of no value. And in fact, you can see it if you ever done sous vide. You put meat in a sous vide bag and you put it on the vacuum. You can see all the juices coming out of the meat.
Yeah.
In fact, if they get into the seal area, you're screwed. You can't seal the meat. So vacuum tumblers of themselves don't work unless you've injected first, and that helps distribute the meat because of the tumbling and the vacuuming and so on. So you start asking these questions: how do you know it to be true? How does it work? And you learn that soaking wood chips. Well, the other thing we did was we took the wood chips, and I took chips in chunks and weighed them. Then I soaked them, not for an hour like all the books said, but overnight, and then patted the surface dry and weighed them again. And they only about a 3% gain. Mm-hmm. Then I took the chunks and cut them in half on my table saw downstairs. And the inside is bone dry. The exterior, where it's kind of fuzzy, held on to some water. But the interior is bone dry. And then you start thinking about it. Well, if you're trying to get a stable temperature, because cooking is all about temperature control, and you throw wet wood on your charcoal, what happens to your temperature control? So the bottom line is all the books, you can't see here, but I have maybe every barbecue book that's ever been written on the bookshelves here. And 90% of them tell you to soak the wood chips. Does you no good whatsoever.
So do you crowdsource the questions, or do you do that intuitively? How does your team collectively choose this is a myth, or this is something that this is a trending
well, it all comes from
we want to answer?
Ask us. You know, hey, there's this vacuum tumbling machine on Amazon, and it gets the marinade inside the meat better, they say. What do you think? And I start thinking. And, and so then we buy one and we start playing with it. We start asking around. But I kind of running out of myths right now. I mean, there were about 50 or 60 of them that we attacked.
You tell me everything is truth in the world these days?
Well, I mean, for example, one of the first things Blonder and I did together was we wanted to know what caused the stall. And we went to the BBQ Bretheren website and researched and everything. And they were all convinced it was either the liquification of fat or the phase change in connective tissue to gelatin. And I bring this to Blonder, and he does the math, and he says, no, it can't be. And he does a series of experiments in which we proved without a doubt that it's really simple. That when the surface of the meat is wet, if you're cooking at a low temp, around 225, 250, that the evaporation from the surface cools the meat at the same rate as the heat warms the meat. And so it sticks at that temperature until the surface dries out. When the surface dries out, it's like making jerky, then the interior of the meat temp can go up. I mean, it's a really basic concept that a lot of people don't think about. But when it's like the question of if you're looking, you ain't cooking. Well, all right, you put meat into a smoker. The warm air heats the outside of the meat, but it doesn't heat the inside of the meat. It can't get inside the meat. What cooks the inside of the meat? The heat builds up in the surface like a battery or a capacitor. And as the energy, it's much better to think of it as energy than heat. The energy builds up in the surface, and the energy slowly, because meat is 70% water, it slowly moves towards the center. So we, stuck a bunch of probes in the meat and open and close the lid and open and close the lid. And you put a probe under the surface in the center, and lo and behold, the meat hardly notices when you open and close the lid, because the interior of the meat is being cooked by the exterior of the meat, not the air.
Interesting.
So you see the air temp go off the edge of the table, but the exterior of the meat takes a slight dip, but the interior just keeps on chugging. It doesn't notice. And we've got charts and graphs, and we did the same kind of experiments with the with the stall, where we definitely proved that the stall is evaporative cooling, and that's why the Texas crutch works, because when you wrap it in foil, you stop evaporation. So it stops cooling the meat and continues to cook. It goes right on through. And it's also why if you take your brisket up to 325, 350, the warm air overcomes the cooling effect of the evaporation, and so you bust through the stall faster that way. And this is all just really easy to answer, easy to learn science. And when we went to the BBQ Bretheren and we said, we have it, we figured it out, I got called every name under the sun.
Really?
I mean, it was like saying there is no God. I mean, it was like, what the fuck do you know? Yeah, who's ever heard of you? And don't give me that. And it was the fact, the truth was
Yes.
met with great hostility, as it often is.
Sure.